it's clear to me that everybody has the capacity to use reason, but it also seems to be, in my experience, that most people that I come across don't actually use reason to deduce their moral systems from first principles. And if they use reason at all, it's more like they're justifying traditions or cultures that they picked up from their parents or school or church or whatever. So do you think that it's more important for us to create a culture that they can copy without necessarily understanding, like how the market works?
Right.
Or to convince more people to deduce their ethics from first principles, or to just work on our arguments?
The first principles fetish is rarer than, I don't know, like in Greece nuns or something, right? So the first principles fetish I don't think is going to be for everyone, because working from first principles is really hard. I mean, that UPB book, that's sweat and blood from my brain when I was writing it. It's so hard. So I don't think that we need everyone to know how it all works. I think we just need them to have the correct conclusions, right? So I don't know how my car works, but I can drive it. So I don't think everybody needs to be a mechanic to drive a car. I don't think everyone needs to be a philosopher in that way. But the reason, and this I rely on some pretty sophisticated science for this. They've done a fair amount of brain imaging recently, and I've got some interviews with some psychologists on my channel on this, that have proven fairly conclusively that people invent reasons for their actions after they've done them. Right? So you do something, and then you justify it afterwards, and that's called philosophy, which of course it's not. Right? It's just called the justification. And the reason that people do that is that if they're harmed as children, either by parents or teachers or priests or caregivers of some other kind, then they lose rational capacity. Right? They lose rational capacity. Their neofrontal cortex tends to shrink, and their amygdala, which is the fight or flight mechanism, tends to increase, which means that they're more impulse-driven and less rational-driven. This is, I mean, they can see this effects, and it's proportional to the degree of trauma that people experience when they're very young. And so, this is why I say you can very rarely argue someone into a rational position, because they're not using reason in the way that we are, which is from first principles, no matter how uncomfortable it is. What they're doing is they're saying, well, this is approved of culturally, this doesn't get me in trouble, everybody likes this opinion, and therefore it's true, and I'm going to go backwards and make up some reasons to get me here. Right? Like the catapult of culture landed me here, so I'm going to call it a mapped journey that I planned, right? And so this is why I say that we're not going to be able to get people to be more rational until children are raised more peacefully, until children are raised more rationally with full human rights in a way that we simply don't give them at the moment. I mean, I think we do, right? We want children to be full persons, but unfortunately, childhood at the moment, particularly with government schools, childhood at the moment is preparation for citizenhood as adults, in that citizens don't have the same rights as the masters, and children don't have the same rights as their teachers, and so often their caregivers. They're viewed as, somewhere between pets and hobos in terms of how they're treated. And so I think until we start giving children more respect, giving them more choices, and helping them to embrace rationality, which grows their frontal lobes. It's like a muscle. You have to grow it, and you can't grow it if they're traumatized. That's why we have to treat children better. That's one thing I advocate most strongly, because you can't have philosophy till people can think, and they can't think until they grow up more peacefully.
Get out of high school.
Yeah, or get out of high school. Yeah, I mean, those things are monstrous.
I came into libertarianism from a pretty strict first principles, like Rothbardian self-ownership. And I've since grown away from that, and I don't really try to universalize morality. I tend to think it's somewhat arbitrary. Like, the way that I understand is the product of my limited human nature, my limited...
But you said you don't universalize because it's somewhat arbitrary. But then you're saying arbitrariness is a universal principle, right? That you have to conform to. But if something is arbitrary, then you can't universalize it. But that itself is a universal principle. I'm just pointing that out.
Like, there's no such thing as absolute truth. I understand it's an inherent contradiction. But I don't try to universalize morality. I don't really think it's that possible. I'm very dubious of those claims, really. I don't even think it's really necessary either. I focus on decentralism, that there's room on the planet for everyone to live according to their values. We should just make space for each other and allow these experiments in social order to run.
Well, but you face the problem then of what happens with the groups who want to impose their values on others.
I would, from my limited understanding, I would oppose them, but I wouldn't declare...
How can you oppose them?
Well, I would declare, like, from my perspective, they're in the wrong, but I wouldn't declare that it's absolutely wrong. I think it's a bad idea, and I think those people are the scum of the earth. But but that's just my arbitrary delineation of how I view these people.
Well, I think that's tough to uphold logically. Like, so if you're going to oppose them, then you have to oppose them on some sort of principle, right?
It's just personal preference.
It's personal preference that other people not impose their personal preferences.
On him.
But yes, it's just for me though. Yes, I think it's just from my understanding. Yes, but I don't think it's like woven into the fabric of the universe, or this is some sort of
I completely agree with you that morality does not exist. Of course, yeah. I mean, but that doesn't mean it's subjective. Like the scientific method doesn't exist. You can't knock it. You can't tie a rope around it. You can't mail it. It doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean it's arbitrary or subjective. Mathematics, numbers don't exist. Right? I mean, you got 4 coconuts, but there's no number 4 woven into the, take 1, it changes to 3. So numbers, mathematics, science, rationality, none of these things exist at all. I completely agree. But that doesn't mean that they're arbitrary or subjective. They're still universals, and they're still absolute.
I'm pretty skeptical. You can go ahead.
On the issue of morality, would you agree with someone like Sam Harris, who's wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, and trying to sort of use science to determine good and evil, right and wrong, and his basis is morality is well-being, human well-being, which is kind of a, you wouldn't argue.
No, I think that the argument, this is the problem I have with the Randian argument as well, the argument from personal well-being leads to statism. Because well-being, I mean, how well did Bill Clinton do from being president? How well is Barack Obama's income and stature and retirement and healthcare and benefits and wealth and fame? I mean, he's doing fantastically through the state. I mean, look at these ass clowns in Montreal who are arresting homeless people and drug addicts, throwing them in jail because that's all kinds of just. They get to retire 55 on $60,000 a year with free health care for the rest of their lives, and pensions are indexed, and the people who go into work and doing something productive are all getting robbed to pay for them. So in terms of personal well-being, people on the sort of dark side of state power do fantastically. So if he's and then everyone says, well, it has to be everyone's general but human beings do not operate on general well-being. They operate on, like all animals, I want to maximize my resources and minimize my energy expenditure. I want to maximize my intake and, I want my food delivered. I don't want to go out and get it. That's how human beings operate. And the state is a massive apparatus to benefit people and to hook into what we all want, which is to get more with less effort. And so that's how human beings operate on an individual level. So the moment you have the state, you have a whole bunch of people getting more from the government than they ever would from a free society, at least in the short run.
Okay.
And so the idea of individual benefit leads to the state and leads to people using the state and leads to long-term destruction. Now, they'd say, well, we don't want that long-term destruction. But human beings don't think 3 generations down the road. The people getting $3 back in every benefit for every dollar they paid in taxes in the post-war period, post-Second World War period, they weren't thinking, well, but in 2012, might be a problem with the currency. No. They're like, woohoo! Free roads! Yay! Free healthcare! Woohoo! You can't beat that. You can't offer people something for nothing and say, well, but in the future, there might be a lot of Chinese who own a lot of foreign debt. They don't care. That doesn't make any sense. People smoke, and they're the ones who are going to receive the negative benefits down the road. They'll still do it. I mean, if someone on the dark side of the moon you're never going to meet gets lung cancer because you're smoking 2,500 years from now, and you're not going to stop. So the individual benefit thing leads to the state and leads to this imbalance of incentives, fueling people's destructive tendencies.
At the level of the individual action, though, wouldn't you be able to evaluate, like, if I hit you, that is obviously, hurting your well-being, and therefore it would be immoral? Does that argument hold any water?
Hurting well-being,
it might make...
What if I like it?
Well, then...
What if I hand you the beat me, eat me licorice whip and say, go to town on my hiney, man? That's my thing, And bring me a greased nun. People like it.
That would not help.
Pericles, are you feeling some level of
What's going on right now? What is going on?
It's like,
You'd have to consider my well-being in this scenario.
No, well-being doesn't count. Well-being doesn't count because... Look, somebody who's sick and dying, who goes and gets health care because the government's willing to use force against other people, is clearly better off.
But the people who you were aggressed against aren't.
Well, yes, but if you say the guy doesn't die of cancer because 1,000 people get robbed $10 to pay for his treatment, clearly he's doing better than they're losing. Right? So
maybe.
Well, yeah, but that's all people make decisions off is based on individuals. Of course we have our communities and that's all important and so on, but No, I don't. I do not. There's no argument to be made for individual benefit. That's just pure pragmatism and utilitarianism, and it doesn't take into account the fact that lopsided systems create benefits for some at the diluted expense of others. The immediate benefits versus the long-term costs to others. People who got all these great benefits. I mean, the wealth in the post-war period was largely government debt financed. So they did all great. Hey, the greatest generation. We've got huge amounts of money, houses. They're the richest generation who ever lived. So they did fantastically. And then strangers and foreigners and the immigrants and the illegals, they all bear the burden of it down the road. You can't ask people to sacrifice immediate gain for the sake of long-term costs to strangers they will never meet. People are never going to work like that. Or if people are that good, you don't need a government at all because everybody's a saint walking on water. So.
All right.
Hey. In a recent video, you mentioned you became a vegetarian, but I remember several years ago when I was reading UPP, you said that animals were not included in UPP.
That's correct.
I was wondering if you've changed your mind about that, or if you think that animal rights, if you have any new opinions about that.
Well, it's funny. I mean, my wife's a vegetarian and has been forever, and my daughter doesn't like to eat meat at all. We have to call chicken barbecue. Because she likes chickens, right? She sees them on, like, TV. Oh, the chicken, so we say, here, eat some chicken. It's like, here, eat a Wiggles. She's just not going to... If you're not a parent, you don't get that joke. We've got some fried Australian entertainer for you. But I think that's actually at a 10... Anyway. But doing some of my research or doing video clips for some of my videos, I came across the slaughterhouse footage that, boy, if you watch that, it's kind of tough to enjoy a burger again. And also, I mean, there was the practical thing that my wife doesn't eat meat, my daughter doesn't eat meat, so... And I didn't eat meat that much, maybe once a week, but it just sort of made sense. I don't accept, at least, this is my reasoning at the moment, maybe it'll change, I don't think that you can get into a social contract with an animal. I don't think you can have philosophical interactions with an animal who can't process philosophy. That having been said, I think the cruelty to animals is sickening, I think it's revolting, and I think it shows a moral horror at the core of both the individual and the society which tolerates it and funds it. That is really, really tragic and does not speak well to the future of that society. I think that if we want animals to be treated well, I hate to sound like a broken record. Sorry, everyone here is too young to understand what that means. A scratched CD. No, you're too young for that. Right? I mean,
Corrupted audio file.
A corrupted audio file. Thank you. And for the people at the back, it's 8 tracks that don't... A singer who gets stuck. But child abuse is strongly correlated with cruelty to animals, right? And in fact, one of the prime determinants or prime warning signs of an adult sociopath is cruelty to animals as a child, as in George Bush liked to blow up frogs with fireworks, and therefore he moved up to Iraqis later on. But... it's a serious correlation. I mean, if you're cruel to animals, your chances of not being cruel to adults is almost nil. So I think if we raise children well, I think that there'll be much less cruelty to animals. In fact, I think it will largely disappear. Also, I'm sure everybody knows the basic math, that it takes 7 times the amount of grain to produce 1 unit of meat. And the water is ridiculous in terms of keeping the cows watered, drinking and all. And this is all taken care of by government subsidies, right? So in the absence of government subsidies to agriculture, particularly to meat farmers, dairy farmers or whatever, I think that you'd see meats that would be staggeringly more expensive than the vegetarian options. I mean, vegetables are just so cheap, and meat is very, very expensive if the free market were determining its spread. So I think if you didn't... we'll just wait for the 10 to stop peeing and I'll keep going. Yeah, so I think, treat children well, you get much less animal cruelty. Let the free market take care of the genuine costs of meat eating, and I think you'll see an incredible reduction in the amount of meat eating, to the point where I think it would become such a specialized, hoity-toity thing that it would almost virtually vanish. So that would be my approach to it. But yeah, I can't find a way of folding animals into the social contract of philosophy and laws and moral understanding. So.
Thanks.
One more question. So, maybe
go back to the animal rights question and the non-aggression principle. There's a famous book, The Animal Rights Movement, in 1973, which was by Peter Singer, and he basically talks about kind of taking on everything during the death limit, that the rights are based on the capacity to suffer, which I think, in the argument of animals being that animals have most animals with body large nervous systems like ours are capable of feeling pain like human beings do. You know, you were emphasizing the non-aggression principle and also people's ability to reason, and I'm wondering, I mean, it seems to me, well, suffering, I think, is just actually a subcategory of awareness, or it's sort of a manifestation of awareness. The greater your awareness as a being, I think the more capacity you have to suffer. You know, if you're aware of your own body to the extent that you're connected by a nervous system, for instance, then you're incapable of feeling the awareness of physical pain. You know, if your awareness extends to the degree of empathy, then you may feel emotional pain and see other people suffer. So it seems to me that the non-aggression principle, as it applies to other beings, should really be a continuum, and that we shouldn't, cut off the line at the bottom of human beings that we can, children or mentally retarded or whatever, that animals and even other life forms deserve some degree of consideration. I would say under the law, since I'm not an anarchist, but I'm curious how you would approach that.
So the idea that capacity to feel suffering is involved in moral empathy and understanding. And I actually completely agree with that. But I guess there's two issues that pop into my head, which is not conclusive, but this is sort of what I think. The first is that there are some life forms that I'm perfectly willing to eradicate. If I get an infection, I'm going to nuke it with some medicine to get rid of it. Like, I'm just not going to, I'm not going to have it in my body. So I have to at least accept that. When it comes to me and E. coli as a standoff, E. coli is going down, man. I mean, it's going down. Or up, or wherever. It's coming out of me somehow. If it's got to sneeze it out, it's coming.
Just out there in the universe, you can find a way to...
Prevention, yeah, prevention's better than cure. But I'm happy for those microbes to, millions, billions of them to go away so that I can go and play a video game. So I think at that level I sort of accept that that's the reality of my decisions. I think that that's kind of morally justified, but, some people who don't like me may not agree with that. But the other thing that I would say is that, for me, when you start to look at rights, then you start to look at violence. To me, that's inevitable, right? So I think we would all accept self-defense, right? So some guy's running at you with a chainsaw and you can't get away and you got a gun, hopefully shoot to maim, but you don't just say, hey, lop off whatever you want because I'm a pacifist. So I think we all accept that where we define something as immoral, as evil, then we unleash the dogs of war, so to speak, right? So we accept that, some woman who's about to get raped can stab the guy in the neck if she has to, and more power to you, sister, stab him somewhere else if you can. So we all accept that, right? And so whenever you define something as evil, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but what happens is the weapons come out. So I'm very careful about defining things as evil. This is why, property's kind of tough, right? Somebody steals my iPod, can I shoot him? It's just an iPod, right? But anyway, right, so but maybe I can pursue some legal recourse or whatever, right, in a free society. So my concern is that if I saw somebody about to take a bite out of a child, and if the only way I could stop that person was through force, then I think you are morally justified in doing so. Because that person is about to initiate chomping on an innocent human being. I can't find my way to doing that with a chicken burger. And I don't mean that facetious, I genuinely can't see shooting someone to prevent him from eating a chicken burger. I just can't get there. Or at a further level, you're about to take an antibiotic, so I got to save the E. coli, so you're going down or whatever, right? So, this could be my limitation of empathy or understanding, but I can't, and it doesn't, because I can't emotionally get there, doesn't mean that I'm right. I'm just saying that I can't logically and emotionally get to the place where if somebody's going to eat a hedgehog, that I'm going to shoot him. So that's my concern, is that whenever we define the thing as evil, then the weapons come out, and I'm fine with that in certain areas, because I think it's necessary and just. But not when it comes to animals. I think there's better ways to protect animals.
In a practical sense, I probably should agree with that. I'm not I don't perfectly implement my own sort of understanding of what's right. I still use some theory products, and I know most of the other animals that probably suffer greatly in factory farms. I'm not comfortable with that, but I don't want to sort of define philosophically or say, this is right, this is wrong, just based on sort of my own personal capacity to live up to it. That seems to me like it'd be a subjective mistake.
Yeah, but I think our inability to do something morally is a good, not proof, but it's a clue that it may be worth examining. Like, when it comes to animal rights, What I want is for people who eat meat to at least watch the videos of the factory farms. That's all I want them to do. Just look at how it starts. Look at these poor animals. Look at these suffering that they go through. Look at this wretched existence that they have. Look at it. And if you can look at it and still eat your meat, then at least they've looked, right? Like the people who are into the drug war, go to the Mexican villages. Go to the jails where poor pot smokers are locked up for years, rotting in their own filth. I mean, just go and look at it. If this is the moral world you want, look at the consequences, or look at the source. I think that's a very powerful thing to get people out of meat eating, is just to look at where it comes from. It's a way to get people out of, oh, you want taxation because you think it's the only way. Well, look at these poor tax evaders, right, who've gone to jail, either on principle or through, I mean, just look at how they're being treated. Look at how they're living. Look at the squalor. Look at the torture. Look at the lost human opportunities and capital. Then it's a little harder for people to sustain that stuff, I think, if they look at it that.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
We are out of time for questions, so Steph, go ahead.
Please do a striptease at the end for small donation.